Okay, hello and welcome to the Transformational Leader live edition. Live edition. This means I'm recording this and streaming it out to YouTube as we record this episode of the podcast. For those of you that are not familiar with the Transformational Leader, I'll put a link up. If you're watching this after the fact or live, you can see it right there down below, adamquiney.com/podcast hyphen 2. Why is it podcast hyphen 2 and not just podcast? I do not know, but that is a good reminder that that is something I should change. So this is going to be part of what will be at least a 3-part series and possibly longer. And the series is ultimately sharing my journey, the journey that I've been on, I guess all my life, but really, I've been in the realm of coaching. I've worked with coaches, I've trained leaders, I developed leaders, blah, 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 blah. What we're going to be doing over this multi-part series is sharing the journey that has led to here. And part of the intention, I've been getting a lot of two things, actually. One is a lot of requests coming in about this podcast where people want to be a guest. And what I notice in the request to be a guest is that by and large, they share their journey in very cursory terms, like I lost my job and it was the hardest thing I ever did, but then I came through on the other side and everything was good. And then I go and read their website and I get the same explanation. And it doesn't tell us about the challenges. It doesn't tell us about what they had to turn towards to create a shift. It doesn't tell us about any of that. It's just sort of like, I was going along and things were good and then things got bad, but then I overcame them and things became good once again. And now things are really good. And that is the journey that I want to share with you. That's not the journey I want to share with you. What I want to share with you is something a little more intimate, really share some of the internal stuff. And so part 1, part 2, part 3, I can tell you what those will be. There may be more parts as we unfold this. Part 1 is sort of what led me to the point where I chose into coaching. And that includes not just life and how it went, but like, who was I and how did I learn to become? How did I respond to the way life was showing up around me? What are the lessons I learned? And how did that determine how I ended up being? Sort of the rules that I learned were true about me and the world and the way to show up in the world. So that's what we're going to cover today. Part 2 will be the journey of becoming coach. What was that like? What is it like? And what has it continued to be like? And then the third is my journey as leader. And I want to create those as distinct because coaching and leadership are very close, but distinct from one another. So I'll be sharing sort of like how that's evolved, how that's developed for me. Let's get a little sip of water here. That's very important. Okay. So this journey sort of starts with young Adam. And growing up, I had amazing circumstances as far as like growing up is concerned. My parents were amazing, very, very loving. I had a brother, so I wasn't lonely. I had a play friend, a play buddy. I had good friends. I went to a good school. I was smart. I did quite well, I think. I got pretty good grades. And life was, it didn't occur to me at the time, but looking back, like pretty idyllic, pretty good. It wasn't without like challenges or things like that, but they were the sort of challenges that we'd expect a 4-year-old to have to face, like, I don't get candy or whatever. And the person I came onto this planet as was like really funny. I got recognized a lot by my friends' parents for being funny, quite smart, very brilliant. And so a lot of attention got placed on my intellect, not to the effect that I was like skipping 4 grades. I never skipped a grade or anything like that. But, I got recognized and put into like special courses to sort of challenge me. All of that sort of stuff got put into those split courses where you're learning higher up. And so quite witty, quite smart, love to connect with people, and also like really, really big heart and kind of soft and squishy. I remember in, I think it was grade one, a kid like sat beside me, and then instantly, as you're in grade one, instantly became the world's greatest best friend I ever had, and then moved away, and then I sobbed for days and days and days. So very like very just big open-hearted kid, a lot of heart, pretty smart. And the way that life sort of progressed was that a lot of attention was placed on me, on a couple things. So one was placed on getting good grades. You know, my parents both are educated. So both my parents have degrees. I think they both have. I know my mom has a master's. I don't know if my dad. I think my dad started a master's and then failed out of it. He'd leave that part out. That part was less focused on. But both educated parents, so like a lot of emphasis in my house, at least my memory of it, on getting good grades, you know, like achieve, do well, that sort of stuff. And and so that was a significant part of growing up. There was also something about who I was a kid with a lot of passion. And that remains with me. All of these traits are still here. You know, they haven't changed. That's who I came onto the planet as. And as a kid with a lot of passion, I didn't I didn't like stuff. I loved it. I was obsessed with it, or I could not care less about it. And so I was very hot and cold on things. And I really like, if I liked something, I wanted nothing more than to immerse myself in it. And if I was not fascinated by it, I could not care less about it. And so this created certain like standards or stories or rules in my house. Like for example, I loved video games. I love video games, and they were just coming to sort of prominence as I was growing up. If you look up the history of video games, I kind of grew up in the what's called the Silver Age. The Golden Age was like when Atari first came out. For those of you that are old, and there was this proliferation of them, and then that bombed, and then the Nintendo Entertainment System came out, and arcade machines kind of took on a new level, and that's the Silver Age. So that's where I grew up. And my parents, I remember hearing often like, well, Adam's quite habit forming, or Adam, you're very habit forming, or whatever. And I would form habits around everything. And so I kind of learned what my parents did in an attempt to support me was impose a lot of structure on me. I would want to play video games 24 hours a day until I, you know, fell asleep. I can remember once I think I might have been like 7 years old. We had rented a video game system. We had rented a game. I was playing the game with my brother. I did not want to leave the room. I stayed and played to the point where suddenly I could not hold my bladder anymore, and I was peeing down my leg through my pajamas. Not because of some issue, but because that was the nature of it. I just loved the game so much I couldn't tear myself away. So habit forming. And so my parents with great rules, like you can only play video games for a half hour a day, you know, blah, 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 blah. And so, you know, not necessarily bad for my parents or anything like that, just the way they sort of sought to raise me and to provide structure and all of that stuff. The second thing I can remember is that, like another example of this is we'd get Halloween candy, and then my parents would take most of it away. You'd get like a little bit after you go trick or treating, and then suddenly it would be gone. And then the third memory I have is, you know, we had gotten a Nintendo for Christmas, which was like the greatest gift ever. I could not believe how happy I was. And my parents said, if you beat this, you know, if you beat Super Mario Brothers, then when you do that, we'll buy you a new game. And so I beat it, bought me a new game. And then I beat that one really quickly. And they concluded, probably along with the fact that I was being a brat, that it was, I was playing too much. And then they sold the Nintendo. So here's your Christmas present. You're being a dick. We're selling you Nintendo. End of story. So all of this kind of created some learnings internally for me. They taught me, not my parents necessarily, but like the way things unfolded It taught me that I couldn't really trust myself, at least when it came to my passion. I needed to hold myself in check a little bit. I needed to distrust the full extent to which I wanted that I leaned in. So, it taught me, if you really lean all the way over the edge with your passion, one, something bad's going to happen. Two, you should stop yourself before something bad happens. You should pull away the thing that you want. Three, if you lean all the way over the edge, it's going to get pulled away from you anyhow. And what's another thing I learned? Like, if I'm feeling passionate about something, kind of put a lid on it a little bit, like quell it, pull it down, dim that passion, dim that light, because either I'm going to show up in a way that's too intense for people, or I'm going to lose the thing that I'm loving, or, like 80% be excited about it. So like I learned to turn that down a little bit. I learned to distrust that part of myself. Some of the things that I can remember happening was, as a kid, I liked to connect with people, but also could be shy at times. And I remember sort of running around in grade 1 and running into this kid who was a known bully on the playground. Oh, Casey. And I was like, don't hurt me. And then he punched me in the gut, unprovoked. How dare you, Casey? And, none of what I'm sharing is special. All of us have stories like this. So I'm not sort of sharing it like, can you believe that Adam was bullied? Can you believe I used to be a nerd? Can you believe? That's not the point here. I'm simply sharing this because there is value in distinguishing what I learned from it. And I want to invite you to make the same distinguishing in your own life. The events are less important than the meaning we create about it. I've heard it said that that's ultimately what trauma is. Trauma is the meaning we create, the story we create around a particular event. And that's the thing we hold on to. And so, because of this Casey kid, I learned to distrust the connection, the opening that I am. It's a bit unsafe. Actually, remember after that moment, I ended up getting sat next to him in class because I was a well-behaved kid and he was a troublemaker, and I like had a calming effect, I suppose, or like, whatever. And then eventually invited me to his birthday party, which I told my mom I don't want to go. And my mom had a great suggestion, which was, well, we could buy a present for him, but then tell him that you're just not free to go. I was like, oh, so good. What an excellent suggestion by my mom. So, each of these things, the through line through them is that it teaches us a lesson about what's innate in ourselves or what's there and what we can and can't trust. And so as I was aging, I was learning a few things. I was learning there are some parts of myself that I cannot trust. There are some parts of myself that I need to hold in check. And how do I know when I need to hold in check? I don't know. I just know that I can't lean all the way over the edge. I just know that I have to have some degree of distrust, and I need to kind of externally manage for my intuitive sense. So I that was part of what happened. The other part of what happened was that, like, there was never, my parents weren't driving me hard for good grades. They were just inviting me to challenge myself and to lean further in and to practice. Like, I remember my mom once saying, Adam, you don't like physical work, which is true. Well, lazy. And you don't like physical work, so you better study. You better do some work. You better learn so that you can go to university, because you are going to want a higher educated degree. And so all of this sort of training taught me that, like, I need to really, really work hard beyond the point where I feel like I've done a good enough job. That's what I actually learned. That's what I concluded. Here are some other moments that happened. And so I'm going to share a bit of this, and then I'm going to fast forward to kind of how that started to lead me to show up, and then where I ended up at the age of about 29 when I started to encounter coaching. And that'll come to the end of this episode. This will be a little longer than our traditional episodes, probably not as long as um, a midweek episode. So, one of the things that happened in grade 8 was my family, not just me, moved houses. And that meant that I moved to a different catchment area in terms of school districts. So I moved from a rural school district near where I live now, which was more farming community, more First Nations kids, and just less downtown kind of kids. And I moved into more of an inner city school. And so, kids that were more streetwise, kids that maybe had, Victoria is very, very safe. It's not like these are the mean streets of whatever, but nevertheless, like there was a different way of being with these kids. And then stack on top of that, I'm changing schools in grade 8, where all of these schools are coming together. Everyone's awash in hormones. No one knows who the hell they are, and everyone is desperate to figure that out and to fit in and to be liked and. And so again, what happened here was I really learned to distrust myself. And there's a few real moments that I can recall. One being that I was talking to a girl, and I remember she was saying something to the effect of like, well, you're a loser. And I said, no, I'm not a loser. And then she called her friend over and was like, he doesn't think he's a loser. And this was the first moment where I was like, oh, I thought I was cool. I'm a loser. I'm not cool. I don't understand. I guess I can't trust my internal experience of myself, my internal story about myself. I guess I have to seek that externally. And so that was one version of this. And then the next thing that happened was I went off to school and I got made fun of for the clothes that I wore. I wasn't wearing the stylish brand names. I and it just left me terrified. I was terrified I was going to get bullied or made fun of, and I just did not know how to cope with that. And so I did a couple of things. I learned a couple of things from this. The first thing I learned was to become very hyper vigilant. Like I learned to study the world around me. And remember, I already learned that what I needed to do was study a lot. I'd learned that from earlier training. Use your brain, figure stuff out. And so I was put in this situation, which is like, you can't trust your internal sense of self because you're actually a loser. You can't trust who you are because blah, 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 blah. And so I learned to study the world around me and take cues externally. Second thing that happened was I was a gross 13-year-old. I was smelly. I was greasy. I didn't shower enough. My dad never really took me aside and was like, let me show you how to shave. Let me show you how to style your hair. Put on this cologne. You'll smell better. He would mostly just complain about how me and my brother smelled bad because of our BO. And every Christmas we'd get deodorant, which we would not use. And so, we would have to dance in school. And then my friend would tell me, he'd come out and be like, oh, you danced with Dawn. And I was like, how did you know? And he said, oh, she came up to me and was like, oh, gross. I had to dance with Adam. So, all these subtle, innocent, truly innocent cues that there's something wrong or gross or losery or whatever about me. And so I learned to hold myself as undesirable, unattractive, and even if I felt different than that, I couldn't trust it. And so the game for me became study the world relentlessly, continually look around me for cues that will tell me who I need to be, how I need to show up, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, what gets noticed, what gets bullied, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it became kind of like, if you've ever seen those Sherlock Holmes movies where he gets into a fight and then it pauses and it rotates and it shows all the analysis and then he plays it all out and it's like, he's going to aim this way and then you're going to punch him in the side of the head and you win the fight before it even started. I became that guy, preemptively studying everything constantly and running it through my head so I could assess everything. And what this did was it made me very, very good at figuring out who the rest of the world required me to be to accept me, which solved the problem that I concluded I suffered from, which was that my internal state and knowing of self was off. And if my internal intuitive sense of myself is off, then I got to do something about that. And it's not going to come from inside. So I'm going to learn to do it outside. So I became really exquisite at like studying and getting better at figuring out, who does this person need me to be? What is there like for me to show up as in this situation? Girls sometimes would take a liking to me in school, surprisingly to me, because there was no room in my self-constructed identity for that. And so I would conclude that they were just doing it to make fun of me. This is a setup. You know, it's going to be like in those movies where like the girl takes the guy and then ties him to the chair in his underwear, and then everyone laughs and takes a photo of him and blah, 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 blah. So even when there was evidence external to me that suggested something other than the shitty story I'd created about myself, I I found a way to twist that evidence to fit the internal dialogue that was alive for me at this point. And um and so I became really reliable to identify, what do people need me to be? Okay, charming, okay, whatever. I would even sometimes date these women ish, but there was no natural organic nature to the dating. There was no organic Adam at play. It was all me working through the algorithm to determine, what do they want from me. And for anyone that's ever been in a relationship, usually what people want from you is like your intimate self, who you are. And it doesn't mean they'll accept it all the time. They might fight with it, argue with it, have resistance to certain parts of it, all of that. But that's what we are craving from each and every other human being around us. There was no room for that. And so as time went on and I moved into different aspects of my life, a couple things happened. One, the circumstances around me shifted. Meaning, for example, I graduated from high school and then I started going to university, and I got a job at McDonald's while I was going to university. And so this represented two new areas in my life that had virtually no connection, maybe like the tiniest shred of connection with my old life. So I changed my circumstances, and therefore, what a relief. I can change who I get to be. I can show up as anyone. I can tell people I'm a player, which is what I did. So I concocted this story like, oh yeah, I used to be a player in high school. I dated all these girls and I'd fool around and blah, 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 blah. Complete and utter bullshit. But it's who I thought I needed to be to kind of impress a girl, to seem cool, to have people like me. So on the surface, my circumstances changed. But internally, the same ontology, the same way of being was present. And this is like, here's the heartbreak for y'all, is that this is what happens every time we try to get a new job, or every time we try to shift and move to a new place or change something up where we're not doing any deep ontological work, is that our circumstances change, but underneath the ontology stays the same. And when the ontology stays the same, it finds a way to reassert itself through the new circumstances. So let's have a sip here. The way this would play out would be, you know, I was working at McDonald's and this gorgeous girl she took an interest to me. One of her friends hinted that she might be interested in me. And so I awkwardly asked her out while she was working at the fry station. I asked her out because that was easier than asking her out on a date, because I had no idea what to do and I was terrified of this stuff. So I was just like, oh, do you want to go out with me? And she was like, yes, I do. And I was like, great, we're girlfriend, boyfriend now. It's like the most awkward situation ever. And then in that relationship, again, I was trying to be who I needed to be to like impress her or whatever. And I had no internal allowance for her actually genuinely liking me as me. So what got created was a second layer of kind of like contraption at play. The first layer was, people don't like you. People find you gross. You're unappealing. The next, well, that's the first layer. And then there's a problem, which is, but I like girls and they're hot and I want to be with them. How do I get girls? So then I had to create, given that first layer was basically unconscious at this point and therefore unexaminable, I had to create a new layer on top of that. So the way that went was, given that people find me gross and unattractive, and given that I want girls and I like them and they're pretty. What do I have to do? And so it became, okay, well, who do I have to pretend I am? How do I have to show up? What's the way I need to be? Blah, 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 blah. And so it became like a game on top of a game, a hat on a hat that I then had to play to be attractive, to draw people to me, to do all of this sort of stuff. And so, I became this kind of, I became the very thing I disliked, ironically, out of an attempt to avoid the people that I disliked. You know, I really despised bullies. And so I studied bullies to figure out and understand what gets attention. What do bullies look for? What is it that they find in how you're showing up to make fun of? And when you do that, you start to notice it in other people. And so I started to become really good at making snide comments about how someone's shirt was untucked or how their fly was undone or whatever. And that started to become an easy way for me to get a laugh and to shift the attention off of me onto them. And so I became this person that if you were spending time around me, if you spent time around me long enough, you just get struck with a barb for no reason at all. You just get jabbed like, you look dumb. And, there's still a part of me that likes to poke fun, but I think, and I hope a lot of people would share, there's a lot more heart available in it. And this way that I learned to bring this into the space was pretty heartless. It was more from fear that you might see something over here, like that I'm gross or unlikable or whatever. And so it was a diversionary tactic that would get you laughing. And so the ontology of who I learned to be in life I'm going to fast forward a little bit, but these systems, these contraptions, and this process of building layers outwards continued to grow. So I'd be like, okay, given that I'm gross and people don't like me, and I like girls, then I need to style myself as someone who doesn't care about how people feel about me and is sort of aloofly interested in a woman. Because that way, if she tries to make fun of me for liking her and tries to tie me up in the chair, I'll make fun of her because I didn't like you anyhow, stupid. So you're the dumb one. So there's like this fail-safe system to manage for that underlying initial layer of concern and fear in my ontology. So it keeps getting built outwards. It's like we're building a house of cards on top of a house of cards on top of a house of cards. That metaphor is a hat on a hat on a hat, which is a metaphor. Anyhow, so I built this out. And as I moved into my mid to later 20s, what happened was I started to get a job. I started to explore myself, as everyone does in their 20s. In your 20s, you're starting to become your own person, often obnoxiously so. You're fucking right about everything, and everyone else is wrong about everything, and you figured it out, and no one does. No one else has. And I moved through a career in software, and then started working there, then went back to school for law and was kind of in law school and looking down the barrel of basically leaning into a career in this. And at this point in my life, who and how I'd become was someone that was terrified of genuine connection, couldn't really allow that possibility because unconsciously I was worried that I would appear awkward or uncomfortable or unlikable and that you'd walk away from me. And so layered on top of that through the lens of like relationships, I talked at length constantly. I would fill all of the moments of conversation. It was very hard for you to say much of anything. I remember when I'd started in law school and me and a couple friends went and sat down and a new person showed up and I just talked like for 45 minutes. And years later, we were sitting down and chatting about this moment. And my friend Jenna said, yeah, the other friend messaged me, like you were talking and talking and talking. And he just messaged me and he said, you got something caught in your teeth. That was the extent of the way that unfolded. So that's also funny. He just shooting that across the sidebar. So that's what I did from connection. I also really struggled with any kind of like depth of relationship because I couldn't really let any real intimacy show up in the space because I was so concerned about being awkward. I was constantly filling the quiet with talk or asking you the next question. I was kind of controlling all of the conversation, so there's no opportunity for it to go anywhere that was maybe vulnerable or whatever. I was also smoking pot heavily because I'd learned to become so perfectionistic and so focused on how the world needed me to be that there was no room for me to be expressed as myself. I was this perfect chameleon. I was able to be whatever was called for in the moment and show up based on that. But I didn't really have many moments when I actually felt like myself, when I could be expressed as myself. And so the path away, the way I'd learned to cope with that, the release valve for that was to get baked. I'd go and get baked, and then, oh, I can feel good. I can feel creative. I can explore creative pursuits, blah, 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 blah. And so that became a big part of like the path that I was on. I also was like so obnoxious and arrogant. And I want to be clear, I have a lot of compassion for me at this time. I'm not holding that obnoxious arrogance was like because I was a shithead and there was no redeeming qualities. It was because I was scared. And I was scared that I was going to appear stupid and that I was going to get laughed at and made fun of or look dumb or just be ridiculed or have everyone laugh at me when I wasn't in on the joke. And so I would do things that would occur very cold and heartless from this fear without realizing it. Like, for example, when Bay and I were on our honeymoon, we were in Bali, and there were these two Australian two Australian women that were with us. And we asked them to take our photo, and they said, can you take our photo? So I took a photo of them. And one of them was a bigger woman. Maybe we'd say obese, large, anyhow. And the other one, less. And the bigger woman, I was like, there you go, look, nice photo. And she said, in her Australian accent, oh, I got more chins than a Chinese phone book. I don't know if that's considered racist or not, but that's not really the point of this story. That's what she said 24 years ago or however long it's been. And I didn't really hear what she said, but I couldn't allow sort of like, I missed the joke. I didn't get it. I feel uncomfortable. I feel awkward. I don't want to ask. So I just said, oh, more than you know, thinking like there, I'm in on the joke too. And then Bay was like, "Oh, Adam, do you know what you just said?" And I was like, "Yeah, totally." And then Bay sort of was like, "Yeah, he'll do that. He's a nut job." Sort of laughed it off. And you know, these aren't like, we can set that aside, right? It's in the past. It's not a huge moment. It's not a big issue. I'm sharing this more to speak to how these little contraptions we build create these moments. They're quite out of our control. It's not the effect I wanted to have on that person. That's not the impact I wanted to have, but that's how this contraption I'd built ended up. That's what it created in the world. Instead of me being able to simply go, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. And then it'd be like, oh, I got a lot of chins in this photo. I'd be like, oh, you know, I want me to take, I think you look beautiful. Do you want me to take another photo? So the last thing I will share, oh yeah, this is the last contraption. And then I'm going to talk about who I became, and that'll be the end of this episode. I remember, you may have heard me share this story before. I cared about letting people know I remembered them. I cared about remembering people. And simultaneously, I was really convinced I was forgettable. People didn't remember me. And so I would often make an effort to remember people's names, and two other things would happen. Out of a fear that they wouldn't remember me and that they would feel awkward for not remembering me, I would constantly remind people of my name, which no one ever gave me this feedback, but I would imagine that's a little weird, might come off a little arrogant, might come off like, yeah, we know who you are, get over yourself. I don't know. The second thing is that when I didn't remember people's names, I couldn't be with the discomfort that caused me. That left me feeling like, oh my God, they're going to think I don't care about them. They're going to think that they don't matter to me. They're going to think that like I'm worried people think of me, that I find them forgettable or don't care about them. I don't know what to do. And so what I would do is just ignore those people. I wouldn't even address them. I'd pretend they weren't in the room. Maybe sometimes I'd be like, hey, but for the most part, I would just ignore them. And people would feel like, wow, Adam's a real snob. What a dick. He was so nice last week and now he thinks he's better than me. What a jerk. It's not the truth at all. I actually think I'm unlikable, and all of this strategy is from there. So who I learned to be, that this part of this journey, how I came on this planet was this like joyful, witty, brilliant kid who loves to connect with other humans, deeply passionate about life, real presence in the space. And who I learned to be as I moved through my early years and then into my mid to late 20s, I learned, and then the start of my 30s, I learned to become someone who was buttoned up, perfectionistic, terrified that people were thinking ill of him or that people thought he was a loser, no ability for spontaneity or intimacy, hyper vigilant, and managing and controlling everything around me, because then I knew who I needed to be. Then I could feel safe. And so I had a sort of sense of safety, but only provided I had managed everything. And as soon as there was like a new variable in the mix, oh, my anxiety would go up. I'd have to manage it all. It was exhausting. And so this is the first part of my journey. And this is the point where coaching enters the picture. So that will be part 2 of this series, my journey becoming a coach and what that looked like and all of the mishaps that came along the way. So thanks for everyone that tuned in. We will catch you next week on The Transformational Leader. If you want to watch these episodes live, then you should figure out how to do that, because I don't know when I'm going to do the next one. But I will be recording these on YouTube. And if you want to see the visual to go along with it, it's here. All right. That's everything for now. Enjoy.